Satoshi Amako. Mr. Takashi Kumo, thank you very much for joining us. Now, relationship between Japan and China has been strained due to Japanese Prime Minister's visit to Yasukuni Shrine. Firstly, Professor Amako, when did this conflict start?
Many politicians, include all the past prime ministers, worshipped at the Yasukuni Shrine every year after the war. Although there were voices of criticism from Asia, it did not become a serious program. However, when Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone visited to pray on August 15, 1985, he declared it was an official visit to the shrine. Therefore, severe criticism came from China, South Korea, etc., and it became a serious program. But following, Prime Minister Nakasone sent a letter to General Secretary Fuyaban, and he made the following decision. The scar of an happy history is deeply left even now in the hearts of neighboring countries and people in Asia especially. I have avoided damaging the popular sentiment of neighboring countries in Asia, including your country, as a result, by making an official visit to Yasukuni Shrine, by which the specific leader with responsibility for that aggressive war is deified. As a result, I made an advanced political decision of not performing the official visit to Yasukuni Shrine this year, because I am assured that it is an essential principle of action for wise politicians to consider popular sentiment deeply of not only its own country but also other countries in order to build peaceful friendship, equal reciprocity, mutual trust, and stable national relations over a long period of time. Henceforth, all the past prime minister had refrained from a visit to Yasukuni Shrine till 1995. But Prime Minister Hashimoto visited to pray in July 1995 on his birthday, and this became a program. However, it was after worship of Prime Minister Koizumi in August 2001 that the visit of Yasukuni Shrine has been a big program among South Korea, China, and Japan.
What is the main difference in the interpretation of history between Japan and China?
With the differences in the recognition of history between Japan and China, it divides 3 points in which there are the difference in recognition about each history phenomenon, and the difference in the perception of the whole term of Sino-Japanese War, and the gap of today's education in that history between the two countries. On the first point, for example, there is differences in variation about the first China-Japan War, 1894-95. It is whether the war was a game of a sphere of influence or an aggressive war by Japan. And there is a difference of number of dead. The Nanjing incident was if 300,000 killed people, which China assert, right or not. On the second point, to be sure, in Japan, recognition that it was a war of aggression is established mostly, and the war in Asia is described in this standpoint in most history textbook. However, someone asked whether that was a war of aggression altogether from the purpose to the process and the result. There is another interpretation that some part of war aimed at freeing Asia among Japanese people. although this is not necessarily denying the war of aggression as a result. That understanding is not recognized by people of China and South Korea actually. On the third point, Chinese authority may have the strong tendency to draw history effectively in order to carry out patriotic education to prevent patriotism in young people. For example, Chinese people's bravery and boldness in an anti-Japanese war are emphasized, and the barbarity and atrociousness of the Japanese army and emphasized conversely. On the other hand, in Japan, it is a feature to put weight on the objective fact and to describe history calmly.
Although relationship is not at its best politically, economic ties between the two countries seem strong, as China has become Japan's largest trade partner. Now, Mr. Kumon, what can be said about the economic relationship between the two countries from the past 10 years of economic data?
There are two factors which are trade and foreign direct investments. Firstly, regarding Japan-China trade, the total amount of trade, exports and imports have been hitting a record for 5 straight years since 1998. The amount of Japan-China trade in 2004 has exceeded $160 billion, which is close to 4 times as large as that in 1994. In 2004, Japanese exports to China reached $73.8 billion, which is 29% increase year on year. Japanese imports to China were $94.2 billion, which is 25.3% increase year on year. And figures are based on dollar conversions of yen-denominated statistics released by the Japan Ministry of Finance. China became Japan's largest trading partner in 2004. Until then, the U.S. was the largest. Japan has been China's largest import partner since 2002. So both countries are the largest import partners to each other and complementary to each other. Now let's move on to Japanese FDI in China. According to the statistics by China's Department of Commerce, Japanese FDI in China has been increasing since 2000, after a stagnated period started in 1997. China's economic growth and its accession to WTO have contributed to the third boom. And the first boom was the period of yen appreciation from 1985 to 1988. The second boom was from 1992 to 1995, when Deng Xiaoping's call for an accelerated pace for the open door policy during his visit to South China created a rush of new investment. As to the characteristics in investment, in the early 90s, companies in electronics machinery and office machinery industry set up production bases in northern and southern part of China, such as Dalian and Guangdong province. In the late 90s, those in PCs, chemicals, electronics components started their operations in Guangdong and Shanghai area. After the year 2000, software companies also started software development in Beijing and Dalian and Shanghai area. Recently, instead of export-driven investment, market-driven investment such as automobile, service, and commerce sector started to increase. In 2004, the number of projects was 3,454, which is 6.1% increase, and contracted amount in Japanese FDI in China was $9.1 billion, which is 15.2% increase. And utilized amount was $5.4 billion, both of which hit a record high. From January to March 2005, both contracted and utilized amount investment have been on the increase.
How has the recent political conflict affected economic data?
JETRO has conducted a special survey in May after the anti-Japanese demonstration in China this April. According to the result, there are 2 points. first one is that although only 9.7% of firms cited immediate negative impacts, roughly a third of respondents expected April disturbances would negatively impact their business activities within this fiscal year. Regarding possible negative impacts for Japanese businesses in China stemming from the anti-Japanese movement, 19.1% of all respondents cited decreased sales from boycotts of Japanese goods, and 16.4% pointed to tarnished image of Japanese products. While most firms were concerned the April events may affect their future sales performance, manufacturers with production bases in China were more worried about how the events might affect their production activities, with many forecasting worsened relationships with Chinese employees and difficulty in securing personnel locally. Second point is that comparing the results of the May survey to those obtained in the November and December 2004 survey cited about the percentage of companies planning to expand operations in China dropped nearly 32 points to 54.8% in May. Although companies willing to maintain present business scale rose from 13.3% to 39.4%, firms planning to downsize or withdraw operations in China increased slightly to 4.1%, up from 0.2%, which suggests that Japanese companies may cool somewhat on China following the anti-Japan demonstration in the country. However, it should be noted that this survey was conducted to companies' headquarters in Japan, which are more inclined to respond sensitively to the anti-Japanese demonstration compared to those operating businesses in China.
Professor Amako, it seems that the conflict is becoming worse, but is there anything that would improve the situation?
We can say that the present relation between Japan and China have lapsed into the vicious spiral phenomenon in a sense. There are more elements of confrontation and conflict involving the problem of Japan's receiving approval for permanent membership on the UN Security Council and the 60th anniversary of the conclusion of World War II this year. However, since the government and the political party have the large element which runs by its interest, they may be able to compromise somewhere someday. The serious problem is in aggravation of popular sentiment. In the past several years, the image to both parties has tended to the improved by increasing cooperation in the field of economic, trade, culture, sports, and the number of foreign students and travelers, etc. The Chinese people have irritation to the point that there is no positive action by the Japanese government leaders to the Yasukuni Shrine program and confrontation on the Taiwan issue and seabed resources, etc. Simultaneously, huge discontent is also pent up by serious aggravation of discomposition and economic gap at the domestic level. Anti-Japanese action exploded according to such a background. If we do not move to improve our relation, there is a danger of becoming deep-rooted anti-Japan sentiment. First, certain action will be required to this program. For example, the Prime Minister must try to refrain from visiting the Yasukuni Shrine or determine an establishment of National War Dead Memorial Park. Moreover, it is more important to make an effort for the intellectual and politicians of relations between Japan and China to exchange frequently, continue a dialogue, and deepen an understanding of mutual position. Moreover, it will seem timely to hold a summit meeting for improved relations and to offer concrete proposals.
Now, Mr. Kumon, if this situation continues, how do you think this issue will affect economic relations between the two countries in the long run?
There has been China risk before the anti-Japanese demonstration in China. The important thing is to understand the risk and diversify it. Japanese companies can think of opportunity to reconsider the Asian strategy. I think there are three main possible risks in China. First one is unexpected or political risk, such as SARS, anti-Japanese demonstration, and boycott of Japanese goods. Second one is the rise of production costs, especially in southern part of China. In Guangdong province, because of the rise in minimum wages, labor cost has risen by 20 to 40%. Also, there is a risk of possible appreciation of Chinese yuan in the near future, which will lower the price competitiveness of Chinese goods in export markets. Thirdly, there is a risk of insufficient energy, such as electricity and water supply. For electricity, it has been a serious problem in the eastern part of China, where many Japanese companies have factories. The possible scenario is to diversify the country of investment to other Asian countries, such as Vietnam, Thailand, and India. Especially those companies that consider China as an exporting base to other countries are more sensitive to China risks. Companies targeting the Chinese domestic market will continue to see China as one of the most important places for investment in Asia, since the market size in Vietnam is much smaller than that of China, with 80 million people, and India's market is still immature. As a substitute place for investment, Vietnam has excellent workers with lower labor costs. The demerits are undeveloped distribution infrastructure and difficulties in procurement of raw materials and parts within the country. Thailand has advantages in stable social infrastructure and a cluster of components companies. And it is also possible that some factories of high value-added devices will return more to Japan. Since the ratio of labor costs within the total manufacturing cost is very low for those devices, and the price of materials and parts are rising in China, in some cases it will be more efficient to produce in Japan.
Now, Mr. Kumon, what would be the ideal Japan-China relationship?
I'd like to comment on 2 points. The first point is to increase opportunities of interaction and communication in many fields. As Japan-China relations are often expressed in the term called politics of business. Interaction in the business sector is already active. In addition to business sector, it would be more desirable to expand culture and personnel exchanges between two countries. Second point I would like to mention is to utilize Chinese people who know both Chinese and Japanese way of thinking in Japanese companies. Although there are many frictions between Japan and China, the number of people learning Japanese in China is on the increase. According to the statistics of Japan Foundation, the number of Chinese applicants for the Japanese language proficiency test is close to reach 100,000 in 2004. Also, the number of Chinese students studying in Japan in 2004 is about 77,000, and it has been increasing for these years. In order to smoothly conduct businesses in China, it is very important to utilize those talented Chinese who understand Japanese culture and the way of thinking.
Professor Amako, what would be the ideal Japan-China relationship?
Keeping a good relation with the United States is very important for both Japan and China. Standing on this point, even if the relation between the two countries is in rivalry partially, it will be desirable for both countries to build a friendly and cooperative partnership fundamentally. That Japan and China help each other mutually and cooperate with each other has important meaning for peace and prosperity in Asia Pacific and the world. This is a point already emphasized by the Japan-China joint communique and the Japan-China Peace and Friendship Treaty. However, it is not visible if it continues in such a direction today. It will increase the mutual distrust and feeling of competition by being conscious of rising China and Japan, which strengthen dependence on the United States. Such situation is by no means desirable for the development of bilateral relations. First, probably it will be important to understand and recognize each other as a partner calmly and try to increase cooperative part and interests in economic security and so on.
Professor